My name is Kevin Suzuki, and I'm today's moderator for these panels for Madam Butterfly. This is week one, and week one's topic is the Asian American woman redefined, us versus Orientalism. And before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself as well as our panelists, our wonderful panelists today. As I said, my name is Kevin Suzuki. I'm a dancer and choreographer. I am also the director of the Japanese Folk Dance Institute of New York, where we perform, teach, preserve Japanese folk traditions that stretch back over 1,000 years. I've also worked as a cultural and movement advisor and also provide workshops for productions of Madame Butterfly. It's one of the reasons why I'm here. I've worked for Portland Opera, Atlanta Opera, Sarasota Opera, Carolina Opera. I've worked for a lot of operas doing this type of work. And because of what I am, I'm half Japanese, Irish, in Japan, raised in the Lower East Side of New York. And what I do, I'm pretty passionate about cultural representation. And so that's what I do. And so that's me. And now let's move on to our wonderful panelists. The first panelist is Alex Chung, lauded as one of America's most gifted singers. By Opera News, American mezzo-soprano Alice Chung has dazzled audiences throughout the United States. She is an honored recipient of several prizes, including the Metropolitan National Council Auditions, Shoshana Foundation, and Sullivan Foundation. Ms. Chung has been recognized for operatic tonal glamour and sensitivity in her storytelling. Ms. Chung's 2023-2024 season included Suzuki in a new adaptation of Madama Butterfly with Boston Lyric Opera, and a role debut of Hiroko Kobayashi in Perilous An American Dream with Hawaii Opera Theater. She's also credited with the creation of the roles of Ox and Pig in the world premiere of Melina Tsui's The Big Swim with Houston Grand Opera and Asia Society, Texas. Ms. Chung has performed and worked with many companies such as Arizona Opera, Kansas City Opera, Lyric Opera of Kansas City, among others. And she is trained at the Academy of Vocal Arts in Philadelphia and is a past participant of the Marola Opera program. Now, also Helen Huang. Helen Huang is a Chinese-born soprano and was recently described as impressive by the New York Times after her portrayal of Pamina in The Magic Flute. For the Glimmerglass Festival, her 2023-2024 season includes reprising the role of Sitsko in Perilous An American Dream with Hawaii Opera Theater, joining the New York Philharmonic, covering Lena Song in the world premiere of Aaron Zigman and Mark Campbell's Emigre, and returning to the Alabama Symphony Orchestra as the soprano soloist in Fauré's Requiem and Mahler's Symphony No. 4. She also takes part in Opera Theater St. Louis's New Orleans Collective, singing Ro Betancourt in J. Hernandez's Mechanisms. Huang's other credits include Susanna and La Nozze di Figaro. Sorry, I don't speak Italian. Zerling and Don Giovanni, and has appeared with companies such as Washington National Opera, Kentucky Opera, Portland Opera, among others. I speak Japanese very well, but not Italian. In her spare time, Miss Huang enjoys cooking and eating traditional Chinese dishes. So one of the reasons why we have both singers here is not just their sort of experiences, but also that they are co-founders of the organization Wear Yellow Proudly. Ms. Chung is the artistic director, and Ms. Huang is the executive director. Wear Yellow Proudly was created in 2020 as a response to the increasing amount of xenophobia towards Asians across the globe during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is Wear Yellow Proudly's mission to amplify Asian American voices by telling the stories of Asian American communities using the power of vocal music. In the past 4 years, Wear Yellow Proudly showcased over 75 Asian artists, and their work hosted discussion panels on topics such as mental health of Asian artists, Asian Black solidarity, generational identities of Asian Americans, and the intersectionality of being Asian, queer, and an artist. Wear Yellow Proudly has hosted many virtual concerts, including the Stop Asian Hate benefit concert, which has been shared with communities across America with the partnership of over 25 classical music organizations. As live performances have returned, Wear Yellow Proudly has been transitioned to live concerts, which includes Songs to the Moon and Girls of Yellow Diamonds. That's their organization. We're going to be including some more information about their organization, so please look forward to that. QR codes are coming. Please follow them. Please follow what they do. Now, today's topic is the American Asian Woman Redefined, Us versus Orientalism. Our honored guest will dive into the multifaceted challenges and perceptions surrounding Asian American women over the past 2 centuries, exploring the pervasive influence of Orientalism and othering across various cultural spheres, including art, literature, music, media, and law. They will shed light on the systemic-based biases and discriminatory practices that have shaped societal attitudes. Alice and Helen will also speak on how they want to redefine the term Asian American woman, share more authentic and various narratives, and reshape public perceptions through their creation, Girls of Yellow Diamonds. With that, I think we know a lot about our presenters, and so I think we should move on to them and hear everything that they have to say on this topic.
Thank you so much, Melody, Kevin, and the San Diego Opera team for the introduction, and thank you to everyone who took the time to be here. Once again, I'm Alice Chung.
And I'm Helen Huang. So we would love to begin today's discussion by posing a question for our audience. What adjectives have you heard of being used to describe an Asian woman? So they can be positive, negative, or neutral. They can be words you've heard others say or from your own thoughts. Please feel free to share in the chat without judgment.
Yes. Here we go. Margaret Ozaki is with us. Thank you, Margaret.
So some adjectives that have come in are delicate, petite, quiet, shy, smart, introspective, submissive, tiny, diminutive. Precious.
Okay, I'm going to share the screen so we can get started.
Doll-like.
So we actually asked ChatGPT the same question. What are the top 10 adjectives that were used to depict Asian and Asian American women in Western literature, art, music, media, and social media in the past 200 years? With the results, we generated word clouds to show the largest words being the most used to describe Asian and Asian American women. For those of you who may be slightly unfamiliar with ChatGPT and how it organizes information, it just responds with what it believes is the correct human response based on statistical ability or probability. In other words, based on the information supplied by our society and factoring in the dominance of Western media, ChatGPT believes that this is how Asian women are viewed. Here on the left, we have the adjectives to describe the Asian woman in the past 200 years. The top 5 adjectives, as you can see, are exotic, submissive, mystical, opulent, and orientalized. On the right, we have adjectives to describe the Asian American woman. Sorry, I don't know if this is blocking. Asian American woman in the past 200 years. And the top 5 adjectives are assimilated, model minority, exoticized, marginalized, and cultural hybridity. So what does this tell us so far? Asian and Asian American women have been and continue to be othered.
So as we were generating these 2 word clouds using ChatGPT, I think I had 2 very strong but almost opposing reactions. I was really, really upset. Alice thought I was crying. But at the same time, I felt seen. I think it was pretty obvious why I was upset. These words are extremely harsh, and seeing them, repeated back to me. And these are not new words I haven't said about me before in life. It's extremely triggering. However, as I said earlier, these are not new words I haven't said about me in life before. But sometimes when I tell friends or family about these incidences happening, a lot of times what I get back is, oh no, I think you're just being too sensitive. Oh no, they don't mean it. And seeing this, emotionless machine that just really spit back what is the most commonly said words back at me, it made me realize, what I've been feeling most of my life, it is real, it is happening. I am not imagining things.
So, where do these prejudice views come from? Let's examine it by looking at US law throughout history.
So these next two slides are a condensed timeline highlighting the legal events in United history that pertains to or affected Asians in America. So as we go through these two slides, Alice and I will just kind of highlight a couple events from it. 1854, People versus Hall. The California Supreme Court ruled that the testimony of a Chinese man who witnessed a murder by a white man was inadmissible, largely based upon the opinion that the Chinese were, quote, a race of people whom nature has marked as inferior and who are incapable of progress or intellectual development beyond a certain point, and as such, had no right to swear. 1862 anti-coolie law was passed by President Lincoln, banned American ships from transporting paid Chinese workers to foreign destinations. This, however, does not include unpaid Chinese workers from entering the United States. 1875, the Page Law was the first restrictive federal immigration law in the US. It prohibited the importation of paid laborers and women brought from immoral purposes. It effectively kept out most women from China, Japan, and the Asia Pacific from entering the US. This began the stereotype of viewing Asian women as promiscuous and sexual objects rather than human beings. 1882, Chinese Exclusion Act prohibits all immigration of Chinese laborers with the exceptions for merchants, teachers, students, travelers, and diplomats. It also made Chinese immigrants permanent aliens by excluding them from US citizenship. This then was expanded to all Asians in 1917. 1898, US versus Wong Kim Ark. Born in San Francisco to Chinese immigrants who were barred from ever becoming US citizens under the Chinese Exclusion Act, Wong Kim Ark was denied re-entry to the United States after a trip to China on the grounds that the son of a Chinese national could never be a US citizen. Wong sued the federal government, resulting in the Supreme Court's seminal decision that the government could not deny citizenship to anyone born in the United States.
On May 26, 1924, the U.S. government enacts the Eugenics-inspired Immigration Act of 1924, which completely prohibited immigration from Asia, and national quotas were established. Beginning in 1942, the U.S. government incarcerates over 125,000 people of Japanese descent, immigrants and American-born Japanese, in which over two-thirds were American citizens. After the last internment camp closed in 1946, it took over 30 years for the U.S. government to make reparations. This was only after, in 1983, the presidentially appointed Committee of Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians finished their investigations and found the incarceration to be a product of racism. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 abolishes quotas, opening the doors to those who can contribute most to this country, to its growth, to its strength, to its spirit. Large numbers of Asian immigrants start to come to the U.S. for the first time since the 1880s. This transformed the face of America, but it also contributed to the new problematic stereotypes of the Asian population, the model minority myth. On June 19, 1982, two white men who apparently thought Vincent Chin was Japanese beat him to death. At the killer's trials, the men each received a $3,000 fine and 0 prison time. The court claimed that Orientals did not apply to civil rights statutes, only blacks did. The light sentencing sparked national outrage and fueled a movement for Pan-Asian American rights. By the progress in the timeline, we would think that at this point, that Asians were considered equal under the eyes of the law, but let's examine what has happened in the recent years. Since the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, xenophobia towards Asians rose exponentially. Among the Asian community affected, there were more physical attacks on women and elderly. Yet mainstream media and our government were hesitant to label anything a hate crime, much less calm xenophobic behavior. Finally, in 2021, the shootings at targeted massage parlors in Atlanta took the lives of several Asian women who worked there, as well as customers of non-Asian descent. Unfortunately, we can't say that it's been the last of violent behavior against the Asian community. So where did all this othering begin?
That brings us to the beast of Orientalism. Here we have two definitions for the term Orientalism. The first one is taken from the New World Encyclopedia. And it says, Orientalism is the study of Near and Far Eastern societies and cultures, languages, and peoples by Western scholars. It can also refer to the limitation or depiction of aspects of Eastern cultures in the West by writers, designers, and artists. The second is taken from Palestinian American scholar Edward Said's 1978 book, Orientalism. For those of you who have not read this book, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. The text is slightly dense, but it's absolutely worth it. So Said uses the term in three interdependent senses. One, Orientalism as a scholarly discipline. Two, Orientalism as a mode of thought based on the essential East versus West divide. And three, Orientalism as a Western political ideology to dominate, restructure, and have authority over the Orient. So to sum it up, the study of the Eastern world by the West is inevitably tied to political control and power. So on this slide, we have a few examples of how Orientalism has become a profound part of our daily lives, from children's books to movies to our cherished daily regimes, to our daily regiments. I'm not saying that all these things need to be eliminated because some of them had brought us a lot of joy and some are masterpieces. But it's important for all of us to recognize what they are and how they impacted our society and other societies around the world, and not always for the better. In this country, it influences how normal Americans view people of Asian descent from all over the world. So I know when I first moved to the United States as a teenager, I had classmates that came up to me and said, I'm so glad you are here in the US now. You don't have to go to the marriage broker like they did in Mulan. And you don't have to memorize all these stupid rules and have to copy notes on your arms. Yes, and I will leave it from there.
So we have them in our daily lives, but now let's see how it applies to opera. As you can see, Orientalism was in fashion for our favorite composers. These are actually only a few examples of the many, many, many in the classical music realm. And, you know, some of them are our absolute favorites. I mean, Madama Butterfly, Lakme, it's just, you know, who can forget that luscious music? But with Orientalism being so well integrated into our work as opera singers and daily lives, how can we support a work of art while still holding on to our integrity? So this is the Cultural Integrity Grid from Phil S. Chan's book, Final Bow for Yellowface, which is also an organization. And please look it up. It is a fantastic read. I will leave you to judge it for yourself, because I think everyone is allowed to have their own opinion. And I will say, like, for me, it's very progressive, and opera should go in that direction. But I saw this, and it was the perfect thing to basically judge for ourselves where a piece of music or a production or art lies. Um, and so it will always be subjective to the eyes of the beholder, but it can gauge how community members could view the same piece of art very differently. So from left to right, we have the spectrum from outsider fantasy to insider depiction. From top to bottom, we have the range of character to caricature. As you can see, the top right quadrant is where we would more likely place stories that come from a primary source or someone who has the firsthand experience. While in contrast, the bottom left quadrant would classify stories that are exaggerated. With works that rely on elements of Orientalism, the closer to the top right quadrant, the better. So let's try a few examples out from pop culture and operatic repertoire. First up, we have Madama Butterfly. This is actually the spot that Phil Chan chose, and I would have to agree with it, because as for people who know the opera already, Act 1 especially is very much the outsider fantasy. It is Pinkerton's, or what people say the white man's fantasy, the white man's view of the Japanese culture. And also, ultimately, it was written by Puccini, and the librettist is also an Italian person, based and also developed from another play. So it remains on the left side of the graph for sure. We don't have it in the caricature, even though there clearly are there might be caricature-esque moments in the beginning, also depending on how much of yellowface that people would like to employ in their productions. But because Madama Butterfly ultimately is sympathetic to the title role, we have it placed up towards on the character side. Next, we have Helen's favorite movie, Disney's Mulan.
So as you heard earlier on in this presentation, I guess you could gather that it probably is not my favorite movie. So Disney's Mulan is actually based on a real historical character and story of Mulan. But this particular version is not told from, I would say, the Chinese perspective in any way. Almost all of the historical events and the story that I grew up with are completely changed. None of the customs were the same. And even the journey of the character is very different, other than the fact that she went to war for her father. So very much so, it's an outsider fantasy. And I would argue that everything, every character, including Mulan, is a caricature. Because if you look at Mulan's action, it's very much so highlighting, for the most part, on how goofy she is and all of her faults, rather than how strong of a warrior she is. So to me, she would be all the way at the bottom of caricature. So very much so caricature. So very much so falling into the bottom left quadrant of this grid.
So next we have the Barbie movie. Yes, it is about Barbie the doll, but which is why it's in the caricature portion, as along with the stories of Ken as well. But because it was based off of a lot of experiences of women and also a women creative team. That's just incredible. And it goes towards the side of insider depiction because these were actually, it was a lot of representation for what women were going through and continue to go through. And of course, the caricature side because of certain characters there and the fantastical elements of that. And finally, we have Seven Sisters.
So Seven Sisters is composed by Taiwanese American composer Justine F. Chen. This opera is based on her own experience of returning to Taiwan for her grandmother's funeral, and discovering the complexity of family relationships between her 7 aunts and societal expectations of women.
But Seven Sisters is one of the very few genuine narratives Asian American women could relate to in the opera world, and it hasn't even premiered yet. So, where are the narratives of Asian American women? While more contemporary Asian-centric operas are being written today, they're still not always told from the Asian perspective, and they are rarely told by Asian female creatives. The stories shared are often tragic events or big fantastical shows, but the real trials and joys of us being Asian American women should also have a place in this art form. So what can we do as female Asian American artists?
Alice and I chose to answer this question by creating Girls of Yellow Diamonds. Girls of Yellow Diamonds is a musical experience telling the various narratives of Asian American women using the music by Asian American women composers. We originally created this program for our organization Wear Yellow Proudly as a way to honor the memories of the victims from the 2021 Atlanta shootings and also to celebrate International Women's Day. The past few years, unfortunately, the female Asian American experience has been defined by trauma, being gaslit, and being targets of violence. But we think the stories of our everyday lives, our daily experiences, all of our joys and trials should be shared as well. The world, and especially our Asian communities, need to be reminded that Asian American women are also human beings who have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and everything in between. And before we continue, I want to explain a little bit on how we use the term Asian American women here. So there are many ways to, again, use the term Asian American. It can be what it says on your passport, your nationality, political alliances, how one identifies themselves. And we chose to define the Asian American woman as anyone that identifies as an Asian woman that has or had the experience of living in America.
So we have a little trailer for you. And here we go.
Alice, would you mind sharing the audio as well?
Yes, so sorry, forgot that little thing. Here we go. Scroll that back. Okay.
Like mornings, sunlight shimmers, dark after gallery has closed. Still I hold my sunny visions, rosy views, her moon but a vision on the Delhi floor. The
Sorry, the arrow would not come up to go next. So we would love to tell you about the structure of the recital. You may have seen me turning the page on that. So it is modeled after the cycle of life. The program is divided into 4 sections: songs of our childhood, growing pains, otherwise known as the teenage years, womanhood, and future. The first section has songs that remind the specific performers of their childhood or songs from their childhood, which may include, but not limited to, Asian languages. Songs from the later 3 sections are by Asian American women composers, and all of them are in English.
The cast is composed of 2 or more Asian American female identifying singers and an Asian American female identifying pianist. And as Alice said earlier, most of this program is in English, except for the first section, childhood, which could contain languages, Asian languages, but not limited to. We also made the commitment that we will present at least 1 piece by an Asian American female composer based in or connected to the area that is presenting that specific iteration of Girls of Yellow Diamond. Each iteration of this concert is unique because the repertoire is altered according to whoever is the presenting artist that time. So why Girls of Yellow Diamonds? Why do we do this? We want to provide an opportunity to combat stereotypes against Asian women by sharing the diverse narratives of Asian American women. We want to showcase artists and cultures of the local Asian American communities by highlighting these amazing performers and their repertoire of choosing. We want to encourage engagement between opera companies and Asian American communities through showing diverse voices on stage. And we want to instill understanding and empathy and bring people together through the sharing of our unique differences, but more importantly, our similarities.
So, after hearing about how Orientalism is still pervasive in our society, you may be wondering, what can I do to minimalize the negative effects of Orientalism? So, you can attend. These mean recitals, concerts, plenty of singers that you see on the main stage perform in more intimate settings. If you go see a Madama butterfly, actively choose to see something from a different, or better yet, maybe even the original perspective. Invite discourse. Communication is a two-way street. Our mission as Asian American women relies on communication, understanding, listening, and uplifting voices that need more help to be heard, and stories that can propel our social progress. Reflect on what you've seen and heard. All art comes from inspiration, every note, every text, every breath. When we say us versus Orientalism, it's not just us, the 2 Asian American women speaking before you, but it's all of us as a society. And lastly, give. Vocal, social, spatial, and financial support is crucial for creating art and sustaining our cultures. If we love to appreciate Orientalism in art, we must constantly work to raise awareness of the long-term effects that Orientalism has on the Asian community. Otherwise, one cannot truly accept and appreciate an art form for what it is, and we cannot honestly face our own realities.
So this concludes the presentation portion of this panel. But before we move on to the Q&A, I want to talk a little bit a few organizations. So again, I want to thank you all so much for joining us here today. We truly, truly, truly appreciate your time and attention. So as Alice mentioned earlier, it's really important to give. So I'm going to do some shameless plugs for our own organization, as well as a few amazing groups that are doing the hard work. So as Kevin said earlier, Wear Yellow Proudly was created in 2020 as a response to the increasing amount of xenophobia towards Asians all across the globe during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's our mission to amplify Asian American voices by telling the stories of Asian American communities using the power of vocal music. So we are cooking up a few exciting projects. And as you can see, we're trying to pitch Girls of Yellow Diamonds to a few different places. And we have a few performances coming up in this next season. We are also in the progress of creating our first festival, also in this coming season. And we are trying to gain our nonprofit status. So if you can show us some love, we would really, really appreciate it. And as you can see, Alice has put up our QR code on the screen. And the second organization we want to promote is the Asian American Federation. So Wear Yellow Proudly has worked with them a few times. They are an advocacy group based in New York City that is committed to raise well-being of the Pan-Asian American community with a multi-pronged approach. Lastly, we have the Union of Pan-Asian Communities, and it is a San Diego-based organization. So yay, local organizations. It is a 501c3 organization that provides a comprehensive array of health and human services programming dedicated to improving the overall well-being of San Diego's underserved communities. So please show all of these organizations some love. We would really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm going to now also introduce again Kevin Suzuki. He's going to take over, beginning a Q&A by asking his own questions. By the way, this does not have to go all the way to 5:30, but what we wanted to do was allow enough time for really good questions and answers to happen, because that's why we're here. We're here, right, to listen. Alice, forgive my gross mistake of the mispronunciation.
Oh, it's totally fine.
I told you why, it doesn't even matter. This is my friend, guys. But when we ask the questions, of course, I'm going to be monitoring the Q&A section here. And of course, as you see, when you press Q&A, we have the option to answer, dismiss, or have an open question. When they are answered, I will go ahead and mark them as such so we don't get too confused. Kevin, would you like to take it away in terms of what you noticed our beautiful guest host saying, and something that you might like to pose? You might be muted. Yes, you are.
Sorry. And my Zoom rustiness is coming into play. Sorry. I have tons of questions. But one of the things I am interested in is just hearing about your own personal experiences playing these characters, being in productions which have an element of Orientalism. How do you approach these characters? What do you do to prepare? Do you do any research about the culture? Are you trying to, what's your process for playing them, and how do you approach them in a way where you don't get into an area that is problematic when you play these characters in these productions?
I don't mind going first, Helen.
Would you mind going first?
Absolutely.
Especially because Alice actually does a lot of butterfly.
Only a fraction in comparison to some of my amazing Asian singers. But I will say that was actually a huge, it was a huge weight on my shoulders before going into my first Suzuki, and I couldn't have been luckier to do a Suzuki in Hawaii, where I have never been to an Asian country. And so I have never grown up experiencing what it was like. Even when I go into Koreatown, like I am not your typical, whatever that means, but like a typical Asian person. I am not petite. I am taller. Than the average Asian woman that you see maybe walking down in Koreatown in LA. And I never knew what it was like until like to just kind of blend in, almost be invisible in the best way ever, until I went to Hawaii. But before I got there, I even though like there are many things, I have a Japanese godmother, and there are just things and mannerisms and things that I've just learned from being um not completely a part of that society, of course, but just from growing up and learning things, even with the research of like, how does one close kimono, how do you bow,
Oh, there we go.
what are like the shoes, like, you know, how do you take off the shoes, what is the orientation of putting them down, and so all of these very, very detailed and important elements of the Japanese culture. Even if I learned all of that, I still felt very much like I was, um, for the lack of a better term in my head, being fake. And it was, I just had this weight on my shoulders, like, especially as an Asian person. Wow, I cannot, I have to make sure 3 times like more that, you know, I am doing everything correctly, because I know that I'm going to go in there and people are going to tell me like, you know, oh, do what Japanese people do. And so, and I'm not Japanese, you know? Um, so I think even though I feel much better, but I've had wonderful directors and colleagues who were able to get me out of that headspace and just play a genuine woman, like play Suzuki for who she is as a woman. But that still doesn't take away, you know, from the fact that we want to be authentic. We want to tell authentic stories. We want to tell stories that move in an honest way. And I think for me, the I could tell that there was a difference when I did this Boston Lyric Opera adaptation of Madama Butterfly, in which it was set in the 1940s. Um, and so I played Suzuki. Suzuki was an Asian American woman. And I have never felt so free, because I was playing someone, even though the years are different, the generations are different, still the cultures are different, but I could come from a place of knowing I as an identity of being an Asian American. So that was very freeing to me. And I don't know if I completely answered the question, but that's how I answered it. So please ask again if I didn't answer the question.
I was actually going to say if you would mind asking it again, because I already forgot the question.
My bad.
Easily. Yeah, no, I was just asking, when you play, when you are in a production which has elements of Orientalism, or it just takes place in Asia or whatever it is, what's your approach to the character? What's your approach to ensure that it isn't something which borders on something that's problematic, or is not sort of a consistent representation of that specific culture or culture as a whole, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. I don't know if I'll be able to answer it as elegantly as Alice has just put. So first of all, I want to say I've had friends that were offered to do Butterfly or wanted to sing Cho-Cho-san's aria that came up to me or called me and said, hey, I just want to ask you, is it okay for me to take on this role? And what I had said to them is, I'm not the arbiter of right. The person that you need to pose that question is yourself. Do you think you can take on these roles? Are you okay with your own conscience? Do you have enough justifications for yourself as an artist and as a person to take on these roles? Do you think you'll be able to do enough research, both historical background and personal character research, to be able to portray these characters as realistic, as much to put them as much of a human side as you possibly can? And if you can say yes to all of that, then yes, take it. But if you're saying no to any of those questions, then don't, because eventually you are going to feel bad for your own decisions. No one else can give you a pass to do any of that. I think for me, I've been lucky because with my voice type, at least in terms of Orientalism, that's specific to the Asian countries. Most of them are by Puccini, and I'm not a Puccini singer. So I haven't had to do Butterfly, and I probably will never do it. But that doesn't mean the topic of Orientalism doesn't come up for other things. I've been asked to do opera, brand new operas that have elements of Orientalism. And unfortunately, it was disguised from me until quite late in the process. And I think after a few sleepless nights when I found out about this information, and I just said to my manager, I can't do it. I can't, I haven't slept in 3 days. I can't live with myself to do this. And how can I preach, we have to be authentic. And for me to do the same thing, I just can't do that to myself. Yeah, I think that didn't answer any of your question. But I hope that's something for the audience.
We love the answers regardless.
So we can move, actually we have a question, so we can move on to a question. So Janet White is asking to hear your views on casting for operas like Madame Butterfly. Asking if it's appropriate to cast an Asian singer as Cho-Cho-san, or maybe any of the other characters in the opera, given that it's an outsider fantasy anyway, so does the casting matter? And is it more appropriate to not stereotype and cast more broadly to elevate the story to something that, I think she's just asking about, is casting Asian in Cho-Cho-san, how do you feel about ensuring, because there are productions that make sure that all the Asian characters within, all the Japanese characters, let's say, all the Japanese characters within Cho-Cho-san are played by Asian singers. And the San Diego opera production does not do that. I'd like to ask you of your opinion on casting and whether Cho-Cho-san should be cast as Asian or maybe shouldn't, and how you feel about that.
I'm happy to state my personal opinion, and Alice, feel free to add on to it. I think it's a question that even among the Asian operatic community, there's a lot of different answers. And ultimately, it's whatever, everyone's going to have a different answer. And for me, I think idealistically, I would love to have all the Japanese characters to be represented by Asians, simply because there's not equality in our world yet. And of course, we all want to live in a post-racial world where everyone can do everything, but we're simply not there yet. So it would be amazing to have these opportunities for the Asian singers and to lift them up, but also hiring them back for non-race specific roles as well. But I'm not saying this is the only way. You know, these stories are not Asian stories. They're not written for us. They're not written by us. So yes, theoretically, everyone can play them. I think where we get into issues is when they're played as stereotypes and characters rather than as human beings with full on flesh and blood emotions. That's where the biggest issue is. And unfortunately, if you look at lots of existing productions of Butterfly, there's still so much of that.
So I personally believe in color conscious casting. I think because with where we are now, when operas are still being written by Asian female composers and creatives, it's important to be conscious about what operas can we like put Asian, like give Asian representation. I do agree with Helen that, you know, this Madama Butterfly, Turandot, Lakme, they were not written for Asian people. They weren't written with Asian singers in mind. They were originated by whoever was the original cast, which were Europeans. And that doesn't mean that we can't sing them. And I believe that people should be allowed to sing this beautiful music. Now, when it comes to new works where it's specific, that's a must. That is a given. For me, where I draw the line is if people are using yellowface or if people are using blackface or and again, every single person in the Asian community has their own line. I do have a quick little story. I did recently watch a Butterfly production in a prominent regional company with my mom. And my mom has seen several Butterflies by now because I was in it or I went with her. But so far, it had been all Asian women who were the Butterflies. And this particular production had Asian representation, but not by the Butterfly. And we were, by the end of the night, we were not necessarily the most, we got through it. Me for a different reason, her for another a separate reason. But the reason that she gave me, or the theory that she had on whether like maybe why she didn't like necessarily like was moved by it was actually because she thought maybe she wasn't moved by it because the person singing Butterfly wasn't Asian. And that struck a chord in me because I never want anyone to feel that way. I don't want someone to be limited to feel something in music because they didn't see the correct color or they didn't see the correct race. Like it should rely on like the music making. I mean, I had my own reasons, but it should rely on the music making. It should rely on like how amazing this person sang or embodied the character, but it shouldn't be because of what someone saw or like how the casting was. That's where I lie. I also know that, you know, there is movement towards, I do believe what Helen said as well. If you hire an Asian person, if a company hires an Asian person to sing an Asian specific role, including Butterfly and Turandot, works that have been in the operatic standard for a while, they should absolutely consider them to bring them into a role that is not Asian specific, because otherwise we're just pigeonholing. We are not doing anyone a service.
Wonderful. No, that makes a lot of sense. But speaking from my own experience working on productions, it's a complicated ecosystem to navigate, I have to say. As somebody who's been an advisor on these productions, it's very complicated. We don't have, if anybody has a question, please type it in the chat, please. We'd love to hear another question from everyone. To, you know, these are wonderful singers with an incredible amount of not only experience as performers, but also know so much about the Asian experience and know so much about these topics. So if you have a question, please ask. In the meantime, I can maybe ask another question of my own, just as we're waiting for another question, possibly. One of the questions I had is in terms of Orientalism. Is there any sort of, do you ever get a sense of any internalizing of it, where you feel where your perspective maybe is almost shifting, or do you feel like your perspective is fairly consistent and maybe has been throughout your life?
Would you mind unpacking that question a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. So meaning, the question I'm asking is that, you know, from my experience working in some of these productions, I personally have came up against resistance at times. And sometimes that resistance, it feels a lot of times that the pushback I get is almost as if they're sort of maintaining the Orientalism in a weird way. And it's a hard thing to explain, and I apologize. But there's, how do I put this? You know what? I'm going to move on from that question because I'm not able to explain it in the way that I can.
I'm happy. I want to say something. I don't
Sure.
know if it answers your question
Sure.
in any way. But I do think this thing of Orientalism, it really is so well integrated in our daily lives. I mean, I think in the operatic community, we constantly talk about this specific repertoire, but in researching for this discussion, Alice and I kind of delve into some modern examples, and we had a lot of arguments on whether a thing has elements of Orientalism or not. And I'll bring up a specific example. It's the TV show Avatar: The Last Airbender, and which just got a live action remake on Netflix that came out recently. And it's something that Alice and I are huge fans of, and they have a big international fan base. And I think like for myself, I was attached to it initially because there are elements that's familiar to me. But if you really look closely enough to it, there are a lot of elements of Orientalism. Is it creating negative effects? I think we won't know until, 50, 100 years later. But for right now, it's making a lot of us feel seen in the world. So it's a really complicated subject that really, you can't say it's bad or good, but there are elements of it that is putting a specific group of people in a box, telling them who they should be. That element is bad, but that doesn't mean the art itself is terrible.
I will also quickly add on, it's ultimately, Orientalism is there, like, period, right? It's about ultimately how one chooses to address it, rather than ignoring it or even taking and saying like, oh, like what are you talking about? There's no Oriental thing at all. But for example, so Phyllis Chan, who wrote Final Bow for Yellowface, as well as some other books, he is also fantastic ballet dancer, also choreographer and director now, and he works with putting like ballets that are like have the Orientalism element and purposefully like uh exaggerating it to kind of put it in your face. Kind of like a little bit kind of like the Mikado, for example, like, you know, it's satire, right? Ultimately, it is satire about the British people, but it uses Orientalism to bring that out as well. But I think that ultimately is social commentary, and recognizing, number one, is the most important part. And for myself, you know, I grew up in Southern California, where I was surrounded with enough Asian people around me that, you know, I was naive as a child enough to think that, oh, we're absolutely all equal. But of course, like growing up, moving to Kansas City, doing the drive into Kansas City, was enough for me to realize there's still, you know, the way that people look at me is different. And um, and based on what people know about what is considered Oriental or what is Orientalism, it changes. And so my views on that, yes, have changed in the past. But ultimately it is what someone does with it, I think.
Excellent. Thank you. So we have a couple more questions. Wonderful. So the next question is about Nixon in China, a relatively new opera, asking if your thoughts on Nixon in China, if you have any.
In terms of the casting, the story,
No specific questions, just your thoughts on Nixon in China. I apologize. It is not more specific than that. Maybe in the context within Orientalism, or yeah, I'm not familiar with it either, so I can't give you specifics either. So
I might be wrong, but isn't it? I mean, it is through the view of the Americans.
Yeah, very much so. And
So,
even musically, it's very American
oh
inspired, I
yeah.
would say.
So I mean, I would say like it's the outsider perspective, just like Act One of Butterfly.
Or is it we could argue that it's insider because it's a story about Americans looking at.
That's true. And right.
There just happens to be other people in it. It's a story about by Americans about Americans looking at others.
Yeah.
Okay. What is the next question from John Gabriel? Many versions of the Madame Butterfly libretto include a subtitle of a Japanese tragedy as a translation of tragédie japonaise in the Milan 1904 version. Should San Diego Opera remove that subtitle and or any reference to Butterfly as a Japanese tragedy or Japanese story from its internal and promotional materials? Because this is not a Japanese story. How important are these small details? Is it an Italian story? How would you qualify or describe the story?
That's a great question. I think it's whatever the company decides to go with ultimately, because either way, I feel like there's going to be commentary on that aspect. A Japanese tragedy is also different from Japanese story in my mind. Yeah, I see how like the tragedia japonaise, like it for some reason that in my mind, because it's in Italian, like I read that and I think, oh, it's a genre, versus like when I read in English Japanese tragedy, like is this then there's a little bit of room for me to wonder, like, is this a Japanese-based tragedy, or is this just a tragedy that you know, that is an actual Japanese tragedy? Whereas like a Japanese story, I would immediately think that like, yeah, like this is a story from Japan. So I mean, it really does ultimately go to how each person would take that. But I will say, Butterfly for me is she is not a Japanese woman. She is not at least completely a Japanese woman. There are many dramatic things in her character that read more Italian to me than a Japanese person. Whereas when Helen and I did An American Dream together by Jack Perla in Hawaii, there was a particular line, for instance, that she was reading a letter from her father that had words that were actually found, yeah, that you sing
Oh,
in
that
yours.
I was okay.
Yeah. And it was, you could tell immediately, at least for me, you could tell immediately that like these words are so poetic, and I wonder if they were actually Japanese, you know?
Well, it was real words
I
that
know.
the story that the woman that was based on, she wrote in her journal.
Exactly. And you could tell immediately. And, you know, the libretto in Madama Butterfly is very beautiful, but I could never say that about the libretto in Butterfly, I feel. But that being said, I will say there has been a production where the entire libretto has been translated into English and Japanese so that the Japanese people, maybe with momentary exceptions, the Japanese characters sing in Japanese and the American people sing in English. And I think that is quite a feat. And it also shows a bit more of how that we have that cultural clash between the two.
This is not an answer, but I feel like this is a really deep question that we can almost have an entire evening of discussion just about this one question. It would be really interesting, to have someone that is Italian that very much so identifies with that culture to join in on the topic and, really dive in, because it's complex.
Maybe we can have a debate. We'll get an Italian
We
person.
should.
We'll get in a Japanese person. We'll have a debate. Is this an Italian opera or is it a Japanese opera?
And then an American person.
And an American person, yes. I think that's our last question. Oh, no. Oh, one more. Sorry. From the same John Gabriel, anything to share about the Japanese songs Puccini quoted extensively in the score?
Which one? The national anthem?
He just in general that, obviously Puccini draws
Japanese
from a
songs,
couple of Japanese pieces of music, Japanese traditional songs in the music, and I guess he's asking about what are your thoughts on, or maybe we can just talk about that in general terms. We're talking about
referring also to whole tone scale, or these types of borrowings.
Yeah. And he borrows pretty extensive, like it's I mean, because I know the original music, so I know kind of, and it's pretty close to the original what he does take. And so maybe your thoughts on sort of the musical side of this, and somebody from an outsider doing an opera about another culture and using that music. How do you feel about that?
I think he did do research. I won't go into the quality of the research, but for his time and, the resources that he had, it's better than doing no research at all. And the fact that he incorporated these thematic elements, I adore thematic elements in general. Like he also has the American national anthem, right? In there. And
and Japanese national anthem too, right? I believe.
Yeah. And I think I think from a musician standpoint, I think that's great because these are hidden gems that, it gives the audience to hold on to in terms of like, oh, it's interesting where he placed that with what is being staged. And so I hope that a director takes advantage of those moments, in any opera, not just Madama Butterfly. Um, but I appreciate those moments as an audience member or even as a musician on stage.
I think for me, it's again like a complex question. So this is not specifically about Butterfly, but so it's more so about Turandot. I have friends that she's not a musician, but she's a big music lover and a huge scholar, not of music, but a scholar in general. And she said, it's like really upsetting for me as a Chinese person to hear this music that's being used, because even though we as modern day people know that these are specific citing of that Puccini had used, he in nowhere said, oh, I'm citing these sources. He just said, I wrote this piece, it's mine, I'm taking ownership of everything. And it's really upsetting because there are cultures from thousands of years, and he just claims that he created all of that. But
Puccini
also,
does love
I
to do
think there
that.
are, sorry, go ahead.
I know, I was just saying Puccini does love to do that.
Yes, he does. But I can also see the point of view that, for an Asian person hearing these tunes, it's an element of familiarity, and it's comforting. And as Alice said, as musicians, we're like, oh, that's interesting to see where he's using this specific motive of tunes that correlates to what is happening on stage.
I will add with Puccini, I mean, someone probably wrote a book on him, I'm sure, but he was very smart and he was very ruthless, I would say, even when with his La Boheme, which was, that story was changed up in ways from the play to really, have him push the drama rather than what the story was. And Leoncavallo was first like he was the one that actually was writing La Boheme first, and Puccini suddenly decided to change his mind and say, oh, I also like the story, but I'm going to change all of these things and get it out there first. So, I would say it's definitely an more of a comment on Puccini as a person
Mm-hmm.
and as a composer than anything else for me.
Quick draw Giacomo, right?
Yep,
Right.
exactly.
Some of the things I think also before we, we have a few minutes here left, Kevin and everybody, I could sit here with all of you all day. I love your spirits and I thank you for being with us and talking about some of these painful, this is painful. It's painful under this Western created shadow. It's painful, I'm sure, to see this subservience kind of codified or portrayed on stage and cemented to where we believe her to be a victim of abuse, and that's what she deserves. So I'm more than appreciative of people who are going to come on here and talk to us and help us to understand perspective. Our next one will actually be about Asian doll fetishism, hypersexualization of women. So thank you so much, because these are not, as you had said, Alice, you haven't slept as much as you'd like, out of the diligence of wanting to portray exactly the truth and what you have noticed in your own life. And Helen, thank you as well. Kevin, anything else that you would like to bring up? I don't think we have any more open questions, but my gosh, yes. Go ahead.
It was wonderful. It was a lot of fun. It was a fun discussion.
It was really fun for us as well.
And
Yes.
more to come, huh? So again, we do this every Thursday from 4 to 5:30 until the week before the show opens. I also want to plug, we have an incredible Japanese group of performers that are going to be at the concourse before the shows. Their name is Ginbu Daiko. They're a family-run and also women participants in a fantastic drumming group that will be providing incredible music for us before we walk in and enjoy the show. So I want to plug them as well. They're incredible people. Can't wait for them to play for us all and show us their art. So if without any ado, I think if anybody doesn't have any further questions, unless Helen and Alice, you'd like to say anything else, I mean, this floor is open for you. I'm so grateful that you're here.
Thank
We're
you so much,
so
Melody.
grateful for you to have us here, truly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin, as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kevin, you're brill.
Mhm.
All right, well then I'm going to see some of you. Yes, thank you, Kate. Thanks, John Gabriel. Thank you, everybody that, especially
Thank
Margaret.
you.
Margaret's one of our hosts later, so thank you, Margaret, for being here. And
Yay.
We love you, Margaret.
yeah. Let's see, David. Yes, really amazing. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Greg. All right, everybody. I'll be talking to you two and you three all throughout the next month, just to, first of all, to say thank you, but also to just catch up and see if there's anything else you want us to put out there for you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Good night.
Night.
Good night.